So continuing to read from the section called The Discovery of Evolution in Teilhard's The Human Phenomenon. If the whole of history were not there to guarantee for us that once a truth has been seen, even if only by a single mind, it always ends up by impressing itself on the totality of human consciousness, there would be good reason to lose courage or patience when we see how many of even the best minds today still remain closed to the idea of evolutionary movement. For many, evolution still means only transformism, and transformism itself is an old Darwinian hypothesis as localized and obsolete as the Laplacian concept of the solar system or the Wagnerian theory of continental drift. They truly are blind who do not see the scope of a movement whose orbit, infinitely transcending that of the natural sciences, has successively overtaken and invaded the surrounding fields of chemistry, physics, sociology, and even mathematics and history of religions. Drawn along together by a single fundamental current, one after the other, all the domains of human knowledge have set off toward the study of some kind of development. Does this mean evolution is a theory, a system, or a hypothesis? Not at all, yet something far more. Evolution is a general condition which all theories, all hypotheses, all systems must submit to, and satisfy from now on in order to be conceivable and true. Evolution is a light illuminating all facts, a curve that every line must follow. For the last century and a half, perhaps the most prodigious event ever recorded by history since the step of reflection has been taking place within our minds. The entry of consciousness, forever, into a framework of new dimensions, and, consequently, the birth of an entirely renewed universe, simply by the transformation of its most intimate stuff, without a change of line or fold. Until that time, the world seemed to rest on the three axes of geometry and remained static and able to be fragmented. Now, the world seems to be nothing but a single flow. What makes and classifies someone as modern, and scores of our contemporaries are still not modern in this sense, is to have become capable of seeing not only in space or in time, but in duration, or what amounts to the same thing, of seeing in biological space-time, and moreover, to have become incapable of seeing anything in any other way. Anything, starting with oneself. Taking this last step, we enter into the heart of the metamorphosis. Part B, the envelopment in duration. Obviously, humans could not become aware of evolution around them without feeling themselves borne up by it to some extent, and Darwin has clearly shown this. As we observe the progress of the transformist view from the last century, it is always surprising to note how naturalists and physicists at first could have so naively imagined that they themselves escaped the universal current they had just detected. Subject and object seem to tend almost irremediably to separate from each other in the act of knowing. We are continually inclined to isolate ourselves from the things and events surrounding us, as though we were looking at them from outside, safely sheltered in an observatory where they could never reach us, as spectators rather than elements of what is happening. This explains why once the question of human origins was posed by the interlinking of life, it was restricted for such a long time to its somatic and bodily aspect. A long animal heredity could perfectly well have constructed our limbs, but our mind itself always emerged from the games whose moves it calculated. even though the first evolutionists were such materialists. The idea never occurred to them that their own scholarly intelligence itself had anything to do with evolution. For at this stage, they had only come halfway to the truth. From the very beginning of these pages, all I have tried to do is to show how, for invincible reasons of homogeneity and coherence, the fibers of cosmogenesis require to be prolonged in ourselves far more deeply than flesh and bone. We are not being tossed about and drawn along in the vital current merely by the material surface of our being, but like a subtle fluid, space-time, having drowned our bodies, penetrates our soul. It fills it and impregnates it. It mingles with its powers, until the soul soon no longer knows how to distinguish space-time from its own thoughts. Nothing can escape this flux any longer, for those who know how to see, even though it were the summit of our being, because it can only be defined in terms of increases of consciousness. For is not the very act by which the fine point of our mind penetrates the absolute a phenomenon of emergence? In short, recognized at first in a single point of things, then inevitably having spread to the whole of the inorganic and organic volume of matter, whether we like it or not, evolution is now starting to invade the psychic zones of the world, and this is transferring to the spiritual constructions of life not only the cosmic stuff, but the primacy of the cosmic, reserved by science until now for the swirling tangles of ancient ether. For actually, how are we to incorporate thought into the organic flux of space-time without being forced to grant it the primary place in the process? And how are we to imagine a cosmogenesis extending to mind without simultaneously being faced with a noogenesis? Thought is not part of evolution merely as an anomaly or epiphenomenon, but evolution is so clearly reducible and identifiable with the advance toward thought that the movement of our soul expresses and measures the very progress of evolution. The human discovers that, in the striking words of Julian Huxley, we are nothing else than evolution become conscious of itself. It seems to me that until it is established in this perspective, the modern mind, because and insofar as it is modern, will always be restless. For it is on this summit, and this summit alone, that a resting place and illumination awaits us. Part C, the illumination. Reflecting in the consciousness of each one of us, evolution is becoming aware of it, aware of itself. From such a simple perspective, which I imagine is to become as instinctive and familiar to our descendants as the perception of the third dimension of space is to a baby, a new inexhaustibly harmonious light reflects back on the world, and it is radiating from us. Step by step, as we climb back up again from the juvenile earth, we have followed the successive advances of consciousness in matter in the process of organization. Now, having reached the summit, we can turn around and, taking a look behind us, try in a descending glance to encompass the order of the whole. This second check proves to be decisive. Everything harmonizes. From any other perspective, something clashes. It jars, for there is no natural, genetic place for human thought in the landscape. Here, from top to bottom, starting with and including our soul, the lines go on ahead or recede behind us without torsion or break. From top to bottom, a triple unity is carried out and develops. Unity of structure, of mechanism, and of movement. Part 3.